Chapter 86, Sharing. When leaving from Fengchen Palace, Jiang Xuning took away the uneaten peach slice cake. Xie Wei looked at her. She also explained with a stern face, Mr. Xie often goes in and out of the palace every day, and he doesn't expect to bring the pastries in and out, so this plate of peach slice cake is left in the palace and no one enjoys it, and I'm afraid it won't taste good until tomorrow, so it's better to let the students take it back. Xie Wei didn't speak. Jiang Xuning's bento was his acquiescence. With the food box in her hand, she strode out of Fengchen Palace. Anyway, the stuffing is also exposed, and the pretending is also loaded. Xie Wei will not see it if he doesn't see it, and he can't change his thoughts or decisions if he sees it. It's better to live one more day while your head is still on your neck, and you can eat a little bit. The peach cake that I bought in exchange for my life, of course, I have to take it back and continue to eat it. Thinking of this, her steps became brisk. People walk on the road as if they want to fly. Xie Wei watched from behind her, and only felt that her sadness and happiness were very real and simple. Asterisk. Among the companions of Yang Zhizai, only Jiang Xuning was slipped by Xie Wei and needed to spend another time to learn and practice the piano, so the time of others often did not match her. She may only return when others are resting, and others may have been reading books when she is resting. It's the same now. Jiang Xuning came back with a food box. Everyone was basically taking a lunch break, and the whole Yang Zhizai was quiet. She went into the room and put the food box on her table, opened it and ate 2 slices before she thought about it. The framed has already happened once, and you can still make excuses for yourself, saying that you were defenseless and careless, but if it happens a second time, you don't even have an excuse. It's really stupid and blunt. Instead of secretly speculating, it is better to clarify in person. What's more, she really doesn't have any direct conflict of interest with Xiao Shu in this life, and she shouldn't be so sad during her time in the palace. The sachet that might have caused trouble was sitting on the edge of the table right now. A broken scratch was very noticeable. Jiang Xuning stared at it for a moment, and when the thought settled, she closed the food box, grabbed the sachet directly from the table, pushed open the door and walked out. Her house was in the most remote corner of the whole house. Xiao Shu's house is the best one here, sitting north and facing south, with windows on both sides, good lighting, adjacent to a corridor, and no one around. It doesn't take long to walk through. But there were palace people standing quietly at the door. When Jiang Xuning walked over, the palace people who were standing outside and waiting saw it, bowed to her, and said directly to her, "Second Miss Jiang is here to find Miss Xiao, right?" Jiang Xuning suddenly raised her eyebrows in surprise. This really surprised her. She glanced at the palace man and did not speak. The palace people didn't say much, and stepped forward to push the door open and invited her in. Jiang Xuning walked in. This room is not much worse than her side, and it is full of the heritage of a bit of a noble family, and it doesn't look so rich, but even a flower goose placed casually in the corner is the glaze of the rain and the azure. The palace people stood in front of the bookcase and waited for the pen and ink. Xiao Shu was wearing a light purple Liuxian skirt, holding her sleeves in one hand and a pen in the other, and was painting. The river flows, the 2 banks are opposite, the ancient pine stands on the high cliff, the lonely sail floats and the distant shadow fades at the end of the water wave. The courage is not small. The women next to her, whether they are beautiful or small, most of them prefer flowers and birds, and write some spring grievances in the boudoir, but Xiao Shu obviously doesn't love it, and prefers ink to dye the country, and the pattern is more open. Perhaps, this is the feeling she wants to give others. When Jiang Xuning came in, the tip of her pen happened to point to the shadow of the lonely sail, and when she raised her eyes and saw her, she hooked her lips and smiled, and said, "I knew that the second girl Jiang would come to me, but it was much earlier than I thought." As she spoke, she put her pen down. also waved his hand and told the palace people who were waiting for the pen and ink to go out. The two of them were left in the room. Jiang Xuning knew that Xiao Shu was not a good person, so she was not surprised when she heard this, but said, "Then it seems that I am still very unexpected by Miss Xiao." Xiao Shu nodded, "It's not just unexpected, it's just a little admired." Jiang Xuning said, "Are you referring to the seizure of Yang's his eye?" Xiao Shu smiled, "Second Miss Jiang understands people." Jiang Xuning sneered, and didn't want to talk nonsense, so she directly put the sachet on the bookcase. "The sachet you gave me back yesterday is indeed mine. But the place where you picked up the sachet is probably not where I dropped the sachet." Xiao Shu actually said, "I know." Jiang Xuning suddenly raised her eyebrows. Xiao Shu was silent for a moment, and seemed to think about it for a moment before saying, "I did the investigation of Yang's his eye, but all this is just a ridiculous misunderstanding. I don't want to target you." Jiang Xuning suddenly felt that she was very interesting. Looking back at her, she smiled slightly, "I know it too. It's a bit of an intriguing conversation. There was a temptation between two people." In fact, when she first knew that there was such a person as Jiang Xuning, Xiao Shu did not think of treating her as her enemy. First, she was born in a high family, and there were few people who could threaten her, and second, there was no substantive conflict of interest between Jiang Xuning and her. To be an enemy, you need both. However, after entering the palace, everything seems to have changed. Jiang Xuning is visibly valued by the naked eye, although her background is not as good, but she is not worse than her in the palace. What followed was Shenju's excessive concern for Jiang Xuning, and even secretly hid an embroidered handkerchief, and those who were a little keenly knew that Shenju was very likely to be made the emperor's younger brother, and she was a woman who wanted to become the queen. In this case, Jiang Xuning was enough to be a threat to her. And it's a big threat. That time she happened to learn that the palace was going to order a raid, and she felt that even if this plan failed, Jiang Xuning would be able to make Jiang Xuning suffer a lot in the Shen criminal division, and what happened in it was, of course, not up to Jiang Xuning herself. This makes it easy to eliminate the threat posed by the person. Unexpectedly, in the face of the crisis, this second girl Jiang from a small family would not be chaotic in the face of danger, argued with reason, and even did not hesitate to use death as a threat to resolve this crisis. "I didn't expect that Shenju's side had another owner for the embroidered handkerchief. Her enemy is not Jiang Xuning at all, but her sister Jiang Suiwai. What a joke." Xiao Shu has always had a good face, but when she was reprimanded by the Queen Mother's aunt for this incident, no matter how unwilling she was in her heart, no matter how unhappy she was, she couldn't refute it. It was a wrong move and a stupid move. In this way, it is really impossible to deal with Jiang Suiwai and Jiang Xuning, the newly formed enemy, in the future. No matter how strong a person is, he is only the courage of a horseman, and he can't resist 1,000 swords. Xiao Shu didn't want to make too many enemies. And the current matter of the sachet just provides her with an excellent opportunity to undo her previous mistakes and reduce a strong enemy for herself. Xiao Shu looked at Jiang Xunning's expression, waved her hand gently, asked her to sit down, and said, "That day was really a mistake of thought, an unintentional mistake, and I was almost tired of Zhang Er's accident. I really felt a little guilty in my heart. However, I don't have much intersection with Zhang Er, I don't know much about it, and I don't know how to solve the misunderstanding in the middle. A thought is wrong, and an unintentional mistake. If that framing had become her, she would have been in a different place by now. It is worthy of the Xiao family, born in a high-ranking family, and he really doesn't take the lives of others seriously, so high." Jiang Xuning found that this might be the reason why she didn't like Xiao Shu anyway. But she also has no intention of tearing up Xiao Shu in person because of this. Since the other party has the intention of wooing her to make peace, she doesn't have to refuse immediately, so she can get some interest back for herself, right? Yes, Jiang Xuning smiled faintly, and pretended to be relaxed. If Miss Xiao has such a respectful identity, if you want to solve the misunderstanding, it is to give me face, how dare I? It's just a matter of whether you want to think about it. Xiao Shu looked back at her, as if she was measuring the truth of her words, and after a long time, she didn't bother to go around the bend with her, and only said, "It's not interesting to go around the bend in front of smart people. Frankly speaking, if you end up going out of the palace, I don't want to make a feud with you. Although I crush you, I can hurt the enemy by 1,000 and lose 800, not to mention that I have to deal with your sister. I'm willing to show sincerity, but I don't know if the previous feud can be written off." A write-off? It's beautiful to think about. The ability to buy and sell is not small. But this is what I thought in my heart. Jiang Xuning looked very easy to talk on her face, and said with great interest, "Of course this is no problem, after all, I am soft-spoken and lonely, and I really can't compete with you. It's just that I don't know how much sincerity Miss Xiao has." Xiao Shu picked up her sachet, thought about it for a moment, and then said with a smile, "There are always some clowns who are behind the demons, which is annoying. Miss Zhang doesn't like it, and I don't like it either, so it's better to cook it properly, so that everyone can be clean and clean." Jiang Xuning looked very satisfied. "This is really good. I also knew with my toes that someone in the back should have framed her with the sachet, and maybe there was something important involved. Xiao Shu is certainly not a good person. What sincerity and what write-off, it's just nice to say. In fact, even without her existence, she would definitely find the person who really dropped the sachet and get rid of it. To say so is to make full use of it. If you can really coax people to forget the grudge that was framed before, wouldn't it kill two birds with one stone?" Jiang Xuning is not fooled, but she is indeed going out of the palace in the future. There is no need to tear her face with Xiao Shu so early, and anyway, she has brought Zhang Suiwei into the palace, and it will not hurt her to be false and wronged for a while. It was a very simple promise. After the conversation between the two, it can be said that the guests and hosts were happy, and Xiao Shu personally sent Jiang Xuning out of the door. But when he walked out of this corridor and looked back at Xiao Shu's two reclosed doors, Jiang Xuning only remembered the disturbances of the previous life. In the last life, like Xiao Shu, she wanted to be the queen alive and dead. "But I didn't expect that once the country was overturned, you would be as a queen and just as small as an ant." Xiao Shu was smart, and she was calculating step by step to ascend to the back position, but she didn't know anything about the danger lurking in the dark. She, or the real enemy of the Xiao clan, was not any of the companions in Yang Hizai at this moment, but the saint-like young master Xia and Xia Juan who stood high on the Fengchen Hall to preach and solve their doubts. Thinking of this, she suddenly had a leisurely feeling of sitting on the mountain and watching the tiger fight, smiled, and turned around and walked towards her house. There's also a plate of peach cakes waiting for her in the house. Life is short, and it's boring to intrigue with others.
星号
Jiang Xuning took out the medical book again, took out the plate of peach slice cake from the food box, put it on the side of the bookcase, and took a piece to eat after reading, which was also leisurely and comfortable in the winter afternoon. After looking at it for about half an hour, someone outside came to look for it. Zhou Baoying, who came last night, knocked on the door again, and her voice was full of excitement. "Sister Ning, I'm here to return your pastries." Jiang Xuning was stunned, and it took a while to recall that Zhou Baoying seemed to have said that she would borrow her pastries to eat, and return her when the new pastries arrived. But she shook her head and laughed, walked over to open the door for her, and said, "I thought you were joking." Zhou Baoying really stood outside with a food box, her small nose wrinkled slightly, and she was a little proud. Everything related to eating is a big thing, and Baoying can also do what she says, and she will do what she says. She walked in and opened the food box. The 3 floors are filled with all kinds of pastries. Obviously, the palace people in the imperial dining room and Yang Hizai knew that she loved to eat, and the daily pastries were always the most abundant on her side, with many more styles and varieties. This is walnut cake, almond cake, this is rose pie, soybean cake. Zhou Baoying's eyes were bright, and she pointed to Jiang Xuning in the same way. But as she spoke, she suddenly saw the plate of peach cakes on the bookcase, and for some reason, she couldn't take her eyes off. Jiang Xuning was wondering why she was silent, when she looked at her, and then followed her gaze. Her heart suddenly chuckled, and she pulled out the cold. Misguided. When I went to open the door and invite Zhou Baoying to come in just now, why didn't I hide this plate of peach cake first? Zhou Baoying bit her lip, looked at Jiang Xuning, and then looked at the plate of peach slice cake. Sister Ning, this looks like it's delicious. Jiang Xuning. She wanted to say, no, you misunderstood, this one doesn't taste good at all. But who can withstand Zhou Baoying's deer-like wet eyes? It's as if it's a sin not to feed her. What's more, this little girl didn't seem to have any intention of saying that to her yesterday. She was kind-hearted. Jiang Xuning thought for a moment, but finally couldn't bear to refuse. Although she felt that her heart was dripping blood, she still smiled and touched her head, and said, if you want to eat, then I'll give you half of it and take it back, okay? Zhou Baoying suddenly smiled, okay.